Are you looking to make a pole for your plant to climb on that will stay moist longer and maximize your plant's growth? I'm going to show you why using a pole with a plastic sheet back will help keep your aerial roots moist. And of course, finally, I'll show you how you can make your very own DIY plastic back pole. Hi, I'm Nora, the Leca Queen. We all know that one sure way of maximizing the growth of your plants that climb is to give them something to actually climb. Now, a big problem with moss poles is the fact that they dry out way too quickly, and it is rather annoying to try and keep them moist on a daily basis. I have the solution to keeping your moss pole moist in this video, and I'm going to let you in on that secret. And as a bonus tip, I'm going to show you how to maximize the moisture in your pole. Let's get started. In order to make the plastic back pole, we're going to need the following: wire mesh, plastic sheet. This is an A2 propylene sheet that I purchased from Amazon. It's transparent, which is good, and it does have a little bit of thickness to it, just to help provide that stability. Of course, you're going to need a wire cutter to cut the wire mesh, and definitely cable ties are in play. We will need something to make holes in the plastic sheet back, and I use a perforator or a hole punch. That's the easiest way of getting that done. As an optional thing, you might like to use a metal rod, and this again helps to provide stability for the pole. It's not a requirement, but it's nice to have, and I always use one when I make mine. This pole is fully customizable. You can determine the width of the pole that you want depending on the plant that you're potting up and how you want that pole to look. Please watch the entire video as I give special tips and tricks during each stage of the construction to help your pole become more functional and easier to make. All right, for step one, we are going to cut that plastic sheet back. And this is going to determine the width that you want your pole to eventually have. I like to use a cutting mat, and that just makes sure that I've got my pole the right size and the right width throughout the length of the pole. So I have decided that I want my pole to be 5.5 inches wide. I've got my knife here. I find it easier to use a knife when I'm doing this process, but of course it is a knife, so you have to be really, really careful keeping the knife away from you as you're cutting. So I place my plastic sheet on my mat. That is my 5.5 inches that I'm looking to do, and I make sure I secure that, and I just start to cut. So very, very carefully. You can be as anal about this process as you want to be. If you want your pole to be really, really nice, you can just make sure all the lines are straight and so on. So I'm quite happy with that one. That is my 5.5 inch plastic sheet, and I want it to eventually look like this. So it's going to have a little bit of a D shape there. So using a plastic sheet like this when you're making your pole, make sure that you're reducing the surface area from which the moisture that's in your medium is evaporating. So you've only got the front face of the pole that's exposed to the elements, and the evaporation is only from that surface as opposed to all around the pole. So it stays moist a little bit longer. Step two, we're going to make holes in this plastic sheet. I like to use a perforator to make the holes. So I make as many holes along one side. And that's what that looks like. Those are my holes there. And I just keep going. I like to have many holes along the length of my plastic sheet on either side, and I'll tell you why in coming steps. So I'll do the same on the other side. You can go to town and try and make them symmetrical if you like, but that's way too much effort for me. You can see the holes on either side. Now here's a hot tip. I like to create 2 holes right at the top of the plastic sheet and 2 holes right at the bottom, and maybe another 2 holes there and another 2 holes there. I'll have 2 holes side by side running the length of that plastic sheet. Having made these sheets for a few years now, I find using my soldering iron is easiest to do. So I'll just grab my soldering iron and make my 2 holes. there. That is my plastic sheet already. So it's got the holes here, it's got some holes here, additional holes there, and holes down the length over there, and holes down the length over there. Step 3 is we're going to cut a piece of this wire mesh that's going to act as the face of our pole. The piece of wire mesh that you want should be about 2 or 3 centimeters less wide than the plastic sheet, because we want that plastic sheet to go like this. So it's creating that tunnel that the wire mesh is going to sit on. You can actually do that, get a ruler, and that is telling me that it's about 9 centimeters, so about 8 or 9 centimeters. And I grab my wire mesh and I measure out what is going to look like that width. So that means that's giving me 2, 4, 6, 7. So I need 7 of these little boxes, and I now get cutting away. I've got my wire cutters here. I count my 7 boxes, 2, 4, 6, 7, and I start to cut. Having wire cutters definitely is a big help. You can use scissors, but I found out the hard way that that makes things so difficult, unnecessarily so. So if you can find some wire cutters, do that. So I'll have the link in to all the products that I'm using in the description below, and hopefully you can find something that works in your country as well. So I'm just gonna keep cutting until I get to the end. Okay, that is my piece of wire. And as you're cutting the wire, just making sure you're getting all the way to the tip, right to the end there. So there are no little bits of wire that could potentially hurt you at the end. Another hot tip for your wire. You want your piece of wire mesh to be longer than your plastic sheet. You'll see why as we continue in the construction of the pole. If you're finding value from this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. We are now going to start the construction of this pole. So we're going to attach the wire mesh to one side of the plastic sheet. So I've got my trusty cable ties here, making sure that you've got the top of the plastic sheet corresponding with the top of the wire mesh on whichever side you decide is going to be the top of the pole. So away we go with the cable ties. And I find it easier to actually have the wire mesh facing the bottom so that the heads of the cable ties are on the plastic sheet side of these. Okay, so that is my pole at the moment. So that opens nicely like a book. Now, this is a very, very important step, hot tip for you. If you are going to be attaching a metal rod to your pole, it's very important for you to put some cable ties on the holes that are in the middle of the pole. Remember those holes that we put right through the middle? So just make sure you've got your cable ties, and the way you want to put your cable tie is the head of the cable tie is going to be on the outside of the plastic sheet, like that, because that metal rod will be lying across there. And it's really important to put these cable ties in before you fill up that pole, because it's going to be almost impossible to do it after the fact. So just putting that cable tie in there, and you can see the heads of those cable ties are there, and this is the outside of the pole. And that's what our pole now looks like. Step number 5 is we're getting together the substrate that we're going to be putting in our pole. And of course, for substrate, you can really use anything. You can use sphagnum moss, you can use cocoa chips, you can use potting mix, you can use anything. For this particular pole, I'm going to be using a combination of sphagnum moss and tree fern fiber. The reason I'm doing this is because sphagnum moss has the texture and it can stick together. It has great water retention capabilities, but it can be hydrophobic when it's dry, so it's very difficult to get it wet. whereas tree fern fiber has got fantastic moisture holding capabilities and it doesn't become hydrophobic. The combination of these two products gives my substrate structure and it just boosts that moisture holding capability. I get about half of the tree fern fiber and half of sphagnum moss. I'll just moisten this with my foliage focus solution. So this is nutrient solution that I'm using to moisten my substrate. And I just make sure it's wet and combined. So I'm really just putting that tree fern fiber through that sphagnum moss so they all live happily together. And that is my substrate all ready to go. This is now step 6. We're going to fill our pole with your substrate of choice. Of course, I'm using my tree fern fiber mixture. So you fill that pole, you're not packing it too densely, but just enough to get a nice thickness to it. Okay, that is looking good. And of course, now we just flip that wire mesh over and use our cable ties to attach the wire mesh to the other side of the plastic sheet. I like to put my cable tie, the head of the cable tie, on the side of the plastic sheet and have that come out on the wire mesh side. And the head of the cable tie is exactly where I need it to be on the other side. That is my pole all sorted. It looks absolutely beautiful. Now, this is a little special tip for you. So this is the top of the pole. The pole will go like this in my pot. This is the bottom of the pole. Now, when you stand your pole up like that, you risk your substrate falling out into your pot. A really easy way of making sure that doesn't happen is to fold that mesh across there. See, that's why we needed that mesh to be a lot longer than the plastic sheet. So when you fold it over there, that substrate is not going to fall out. And all we do is then grab some cable ties and just put it through the mesh and into that hole that we've created. Hang on, like so. Push that through into the mesh and that closes that off rather nicely, if I do say so myself. There we go. Isn't that beautiful? None of that substrate is going to fall out of there. That is just looking beautiful. The next step in the process is just to cut all those little bits of cable tie that are protruding, because that's quite unsightly. So away we go. That is my pole. I'm very, very happy with that. The only bits of cable tie left are the cable ties at the back. That is looking really, really good. Another bonus tip for you. This is my metal rod, and I'm going to attach this metal rod to the back of this pole. And the reason I'm doing that is just to provide a bit more stability to this pole, especially if you're growing your plant in a semi-hydro setup. Like I use Leca to grow my plants, and it's not as stable when you put the pole in as when you're using soils. And I'm not tightening that. You can see it's still quite loose. That's just a placeholder. And we'll tighten that up when we put our plant on the pole and put it up in the pot. And that's what my constructed pole now looks like. So with my pole all done, I'm going to show you how I attach my Syngonium frosted heart to this pole and pot it up in its nursery pot. But why would you want to be making your own pole anyway when you can just as easily go and buy a kit? If you're looking to have a lot of poles like I do, it definitely ends up being cheaper for you to make your own pole as opposed to buying one. Pre-made ones as well tend to be a certain size. It's made for what it is. You can't adjust it in any way. You have to use it as it is. Whereas when you make your own, like this one, you can make it small, you can make it thin, you can make it however you want based on the look that you're trying to go for or what you're trying to do with your plant. You can also future-proof your pole, actually. So putting this metal rod here is part of the future-proofing process, because I know I'm probably going to need to extend this pole. So by putting this pole at the back, when I put in a much longer pole that's going to support this plant as I put more and more extensions, I can attach that longer pole to this pole and not have any trouble getting everything to be stable because I future-proofed it. And that's something that you probably won't be able to do if you buy a pre-made one. So there's lots to be said for making your own. Of course, if you don't really want to, if you don't want to go through that initial expense of getting all the materials together, I certainly recommend that you go and buy one. Buying a pole is better than no pole at all. Okay, so let's get this baby sorted. This one is living in Leca and it's living in a 14 centimeter pot. I'll take that plant out of that pot very, very gently. There we go. And the reason I'm doing this is I want to attach these plants to the pole. It's really important to get the plant attached to the pole before you put the pole in the pot, because then I can position my plant exactly where I need it to be. And what's really important is I don't want these roots to be next to the medium, because then those roots are likely to have root rot. So I want all that to be down there and not up there. And I've got two plants here, so I want to position them nicely so they're not disturbing each other. You can use a Velcro plant tie to keep the plant in place, but you could also use a paper clip or a greening pin. I'm using a greening pin today, and that will just keep my plants exactly where I need them to be. So I need this one to stay here, and I'll get this one, look and see where the area roots are coming from and try and position it that way. So that goes like that. I'll grab my greening pin here, and that's my plant attached there. I'm going to get my pot and try to position where I want that. So I want my pole to be right flush with the top of the pot, right there. So remembering how we haven't secured that, so now that I know where I need it to be, I can secure my cable ties, and that holds that in place. That pole is exactly where I need it to be in relation to the nursery pot. So that is all wood. So now all that's left to do is for me to sort out this mesh here. There's a lot of it that I don't need, so I'm just going to cut off the excess. And it's easy to tell where the excess is. It's right there. So that goes. I get my pot and I fill that a little bit with Leca. So just about a third of the way. And I push that like so I can position my pole. And I get my roots in. Can be a bit fiddly. Oh, there we go. That's exactly where I need it to be. And now I start to fill my pot with Leca. And at this stage, that pole is absolutely stable. I don't even need to hold on to it. Give that a shake to make sure that Leca is settled. That is my Syngonium frosted heart, all potted up on a plastic sheet-backed pole with a metal rod attached, providing stability, looking absolutely fantastic, very stable in its Leca pot, and it's now going to start climbing and living the life, making a pole that is optimized to keep the moisture in by using a plastic sheet back and using a substrate that will keep as much of that moisture as it can, will definitely help you make a pole that keeps that moisture longer. It makes the job of keeping your pole moist easier. To help you keep your poles moist, watch this next video where I show you how to water your poles. I'll see you there.